We have a weird homicide.
In a scene described by one investigator as reminiscent of a weird religious rite, 5 persons, including actress SHARON Tate, were found dead at the home of Miss Tate and her husband, screen director Roman Polanski. Miss Tate, who starred in Valley of the Dolls, was 8 months pregnant and was found in a bikini-type nightgown with a rope around her neck attached to the body of a man.
2 bodies inside, 2 bodies outside.
Among the other victims were Hollywood hairstylist Jay Sebring and coffee heiress Abigail Folger. Authorities would allow no one in an unofficial capacity inside the posh $200,000 home in the hills overlooking Los Angeles. When police arrived, they found the telephones and electricity lines cut. The bodies had been dead about 12 hours. They were discovered this morning by a maid who ran screaming to neighbors. One officer summed up the murders when he said, "In all my years, I have never seen anything like this before."
While the police admitted they had no suspects in the Bel Air massacre, there were 2 more murders 15 miles away in the Silver Lake section of Los Angeles. Market owner Leo LaBianca and his wife Rosemary were found by their children stabbed and mutilated. The word war was carved into LaBianca's chest, and "Death to Pigs" was smeared in the blood of one of the victims. The word pig had been scrawled in blood on the door of the Bel Air mansion, where actress SHARON Tate and 4 others were slain, but police said, despite the similarities, they do not believe the crimes are linked.
When I stand on the mountain and I say, do it, it gets done. If it don't get done, then I'll move on it. And that's the last thing in the world you want me to do.
And that was Charles Manson, the Messianic, charismatic cult leader of Helter Skelter. And we have next to us author Simon Wells, who's just written a book on a biography, if you will, of Charles Manson.
Nice to meet you, Ethan. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Welcome to the show. So,
Thank you.
We are sitting in Death Valley.
Death Valley.
What can you tell us about Manson? I mean, how did this how tall was he? 5'3"?
Yeah, well, it depends on which sources, but he was certainly under 5'5". He was clocked in by police at 5'2". The Manson family would claim he was 5'4", but he was small, but by no means diminutive. He was a fireball of many layers of many energies going on within that little character. I think, broadly speaking, anyone who's a student of the 1960s, like I am, will have come across Charles Manson, because he's the party pooper, he's the bogeyman, he's the character who sport the party. The 60s, we look at it as an era of love and peace and general optimism, which it was for the most part. But Manson, and it's really interesting for those who chart such things like me, is that Manson came along at the very end of the 1960s, the tail end of the 60s, with the Tate LaBianca murders, August '69, and of course, you got Altamont towards the end of the year,
which is the Rolling Stones thing, where the bikers stabbed someone, right?
Hells Angels just killed someone. 4 people died at Altamont, and that happened sort of like all around the same time with the Manson family thing. So it was a curtain puller for the end of the 60s, and Manson was the sort of person pulling that curtain primarily. But that's really for a variety of reasons. I mean, Manson overall is an invention. The reality of Charles Manson, as I pointed out in my book, Coming Down Fast, is he was a sort of like an enigmatic but sort of modest busker who had influence over a lot of young people in the later part of the 1960s. And he was a jailbird, so he knew how to control people, because he'd been in jail half his life, right up to 1967. And I mean, it's a long story, but in a nutshell, Manson really, his timing was pretty immaculate, in as much as he was released from jail in 1967 and went straight to San Francisco in the throes of the Summer of Love. Right. And so, he met a lot of very impressionable people, and as I'm keen to point out, that anyone who's sort of walked the hippie trail and sort of hung out, I mean, I've hung out with quite a few Charles Manson characters, sans murders, but there's certainly a lot of Messianic characters around who've got the answers. And
it's funny you say that, but I guess it points to the same thing. We've all sat on a late night bus next to a guy that, I mean, Manson, when you see him in court and stuff, ranting and raving, sounds like that kind of drunk guy who sits next to you and like invades your space and wants to tell you everything about everything and thinks he knows the answer.
Yeah.
It's a curious thing. I mean, what separated Manson perhaps from them, or are they just someone that
Yeah, I think it was.
He just
more
took it to the next level, essentially, didn't he?
I think, yeah, it really was a situation which, when you look back at the time, it was an innocent time. And I think actually if one decodes the whole hippie ethos, it's based on innocence. And then you take innocence a step further and you've got gullibility. And then you throw in LSD, and then you throw in children who have, you know, this was the first generation which didn't have to actually go to war, although a lot of people were being drafted to Vietnam. But let's just say that, you know, national service and certainly, you know, over in this country, rationing, were a new reality for many people. So there was an air of you know, incredible innocence around, and it allowed the hippie thing allowed people like Manson a voice.
Right.
And I agree with you that I think that you know, I've met many on the festival sites and traveller sites, many people who spout off garbage.
Right.
But also, if we dig deep enough into our own psyches and go back to the period when we were all 16, 17, there was always a guy in the pub. There was always a character who was.
Just hold your mic if you want. Just for those who are listening, just to the audio podcast, we are in fact outside, and we're getting like a few passers-by and tourists visiting the rocks.
It's interesting how popular this remote spot is.
It is.
Oh, you guys, yeah,
There's lots and lots of people passing by.
Passing by. But anyway, that's the nature of live reality, and I think, you know, when one.
Well, that's why we did it here.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to actually get back right to
get a feeling of.
Get a feeling for it.
Yeah.
And there we go. So I mean, basically, anyone who's like myself has, you know, been on the Traveller Trail and the Hippie Trail. I've sat around campfires with certain characters late at night smoking weed. Not me. Who
in California, it's okay, Simon. You know this.
I know, as we're in California. And I think that the thing is that when you are 16, 17. And I'm not going to be sexist about this, but a lot of young girls are very impressionable.
Looking for a father figure.
Looking for a father figure.
Yeah.
And then what you have is a situation where someone like Manson, who's got this kudos of coming out of jail, and I remember being 16, 17 and meeting a few people who came out of jail, and they had a great, for that age, a great credibility. The interesting thing about Manson, the people he attracted were all sort of teenagers, early 20s. No one from his own age group took him seriously.
Yeah. So
the only people that he could actually impress and, you know, actually have any sort of effect upon were of that age group. And the interesting thing about that is that he was a control freak. He knew how to control people, and young girls especially. You know, he had a lot of answers, and I think that age, and again, we have to put our minds back into that mindset of that 16, 17 thing.
Sure.
There's no answers. You know, nobody understands us. Nobody, and then if a character comes along who does understand you, you are likely to sort of follow them rather than your parents, your teachers.
What's the thing that got Manson into prison in the first place? I mean, you've got Ed Gein. I mean, not that he's a serial killer as such, but he was obviously very charismatic. But like a lot of the serial killers have a different. Serial killers have an odd relationship with their mother. I think Gary Ridgway's mother used to bathe him, I think, up to his teens and with an open bathrobe. And I think Ed Gein's mother was like very like strong and had a kind of pseudo-sexual relationship with him when she left. I guess he tried to replace her by like carving up bodies and trying to, I guess, rebuild her. What was Manson's childhood like? What led him to these petty crimes? Which I guess did he go for juvie hall or juvenile?
Yeah, he was on the rung of career criminal from the word go. Although these weren't sort of spectacular crimes of the sort of people that you mentioned. These were petty crimes. He was the child of a young girl, possibly a prostitute, possibly just a good time girl,
right?
And certainly an unwanted child, let's say that much. And so there was a mother influence there. The father had gone.
Who was the father? Did you know the father?
There was a character called Colonel Scott, who I dare say the mother didn't even know him. It was a very short affair, and Charlie really was just a throwaway kid.
Right.
He was brought up mainly by his aunt and uncle. But the damage had been done at an early age. He constantly referenced his mother within all the interviews he's done since that. So there obviously was something there of betrayal. And I think, again, when we take it fast forward to the young kids that collected around him, he knew that, and most of those children that were his hardcore were from broken homes. So there's the answer, really. But Charlie, no, he was from I suppose there is a line really, you know, a preschool, Borstal, a junior prison, and then into Premier League prison. Although all on ridiculously small charges. His prison collateral really was built up. It was all a cumulative career of, like, you know, things like, you know, fake checks, or, you know, driving young girls across states, and statutory rape and stuff. Not that that's minor, but in the sense that it was there was nothing there to suggest that, you know,
he would go down the path he eventually went down.
No, and it's interesting, if you actually really in fine detail pay attention to his prison record, the judges were all keen to give him a second chance, and he kept bouncing off this until at the end, where he got charged on cashing in someone else's $50 check or something.
Right.
Because he'd been given a chance, he had to then serve out this 10-year sentence, which he did in Terminal Island, just off LA. And that then he had this epiphany within jail, and he's actually looking at the face of 10 years in jail for something like a check.
Right.
That he then started exploring inner space, and that's when the story really gets interesting.
Well, he comes out of jail in 1967. Is that correct?
March
in
67.
Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And right in the middle of the counterculture movement, everyone's taking LSD.
Yeah.
There's lots of impressionable people. I guess you've got what is it? If you're going to San Francisco.
Yeah, Scott McKenzie, wear some flowers in your hair.
Dragging, like, I guess hundreds of thousands of hopeful young people wanting to be a star, wanting to get a part of this new kind of like new wave of, I guess, counterculture, taking drugs, dropping out, as Timothy Leary once said. And he just lands right smack in the middle of this.
Yeah, timing was impeccable. And also, this is a guy who probably hadn't seen daylight outside of a prison cell since the 50s, you know. So this is incredible. You know, you
Technicolor world, if you will, from
yeah,
the black and white 50s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And therefore is, for him, it's another sort of innocence. I don't know if he was immediately coming out of jail with the idea to control young people. No, I think the idea was he came out of jail.
He was that guy on the late night bus, and people started to listen, I guess,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, well, you know, that's such a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Because San Francisco of 1967 was a place where any theory, philosophy, any screwball, crackpot, nutcase was given a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. But Manson gravitated there very quickly after release from jail. And, you know, the logic of it was this, that, hey, Ashbury, especially of that era, 67, living, eating, survival wasn't too difficult. They had a group of people called the Diggers, who were this sort of counterculture group of idealists, brilliant idealists, who you know, really concentrated on the word free.
Yes.
And while, you know, most people took free love or whatever, they took it a step further, that you could live very simply if people just sort of shared communally, basic sort of way of looking at things, but very attractive to those kids at that point. And Manson too. You imagine you're thrown out of jail with, what was it, I think about £100 warrant to live on. It made more sense really to go to somewhere like that, where your food and your accommodation and everything was provided. You know,
a bit like Burning Man, I guess, in some respects, where there's no currency, but you trade things for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the respect that we're going, well, the Diggers, obviously, why they're called the Diggers, we go back to the Diggers Rebellion, you know, way back with Stanley and that, with the, you know, people were living communally and sharing. It's an idealism, and I suppose San Francisco was a minor Brigadoon for the time. You know, it had popped up, everyone was enjoying this, but like anything and anyone who's been involved in counterculture, there's very much a start, a beginning, and an end. And by the time Manson had established himself in San Francisco, the whole era had changed, as you said earlier. There was hundreds of thousands of people pouring into the district, but mixed in amongst those dreamers and diggers and idealists, you had a hardcore of drug dealers and people who were keen to exploit.
Well, of course, yeah.
That, and the place became, you know, I remember one of the parole officers telling me, he said, you might have had a song, if you're going to San Francisco, make sure you wear some flowers in your hair. It was more like, you make sure you bring a Colt 45 along, because it had got to the point.
Did the drugs change then? Was the LSD and stuff, that stuff was established then, and then did it switch somehow? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what happened was that, and again, I don't want to go too heavy into the drug thing, but there was a certain innocence with LSD when it arrived. And when the major dealers sort of turned up in San Francisco, they were synthesizing hallucinogenics, and they came up with stuff like STP, which is those who chant such things. They have this terrible effect. Speed had made a huge impact in there.
Yeah. And
interestingly enough, if one cares to listen to Manson, he was very much against speed and most chemicals. He, while he tolerated use of LSD, he'd seen the damage which had happened to people who were sort of fired on certainly amphetamines and propellants of that sort. It's hard to to pick this apart from the overriding mythology of Manson, because most people think they're a drug-crazed, drug band of lunatics. There actually was some ethics going on in there, and it's very hard to sort of pick them away because of all the controversy which has attached themselves to Manson over the years. But that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
And it's actually got so bad that Manson decided to move out of San Francisco, and as a lot of people were doing, jump in a school bus and go on the road.
Why is he such an interesting figure for you? What compelled you to write the book? Because he has this kind of, he does have this rock star quality. I mean, Marilyn Manson obviously has chosen part of his name from that. There's so many like iconic images in film, in art of him. People still, I mean, he got married, I think, or nearly, to someone called Star last year. So he still has that kind of like weird celebrity and pull, doesn't he?
Yes, and how that came about is interesting. I think I don't know. I'm not too sure. And again, in the passage of time, much has been lost. But I think Charles Manson is the first rock and roll criminal.
Yeah.
And he looked like a rock star. He had that presence. He certainly got the enigma and charisma. Most criminals don't have enigma and charisma. So this was new in the crime history. You know, a sort of a rock star criminal. It was, a rock star murderer even though I would probably argue Charles Manson was not a murderer. But that's another story. But I found anyone who's a student of the 60s like myself has come across Charles Manson. Most people dismiss him as a lunatic and a crazed nutcase. I'm quite an inquiring mind, and having met a lot of people, I was involved with that New Age Traveller movement in the 80s. I've met a lot of people, damn good people as well, who you can't sort of really just write people off in the way they look, and maybe some of the stuff they come out with, there's usually many grains of truth and honesty that come through.
Sure.
But I mean, when murder gets thrown in, most logic goes to the wind, and you then end up with a situation where the myth of Manson, and I use that very carefully, has long overrode the reality.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
And present a less hysterical account of a very well told story, a very well repeated story, but a less historic. And to me, Manson's not unusual in the realms of sort of the counterculture. There's many Charles Mansons around, and the reality that is certainly like commune dwelling, as I'm very much aware of, is that you get a situation where a commune of like-minded people come together and it's heaven. It usually is paradise for a little bit, but then things do start to cave in on each other. It's the reality of life. And that's really what happened with Manson. That's why I called the book Coming Down Fast, is that basically the whole story was an idyllic situation which collapsed.
Well, that generation of kids, I guess, grew up, began to get their own mind or start thinking in more adult ways, I guess, going, I need to get my life together, and moved on from that and left him. So we had to gather some more acolytes around him, perhaps? Or?
Yes, I mean, that's true. I think what happened was, and we're looking now at 1969, from the innocence of 1967 through things started to change a bit in 1968, but by 1969 the whole hippie dream had collapsed quite spectacularly, and also Manson's proclamation of his own divinity stroke recording singer success had really failed to materialise. And of course, being the character that he was, and given that most cults, I hate to use the word cult in association with the Manson family, but I'll say it in the sense that most cults who have a self-appointed leader, to maintain their sort of, their head status, that's things that they were been saying around campfires for many years, which weren't patently happening. I think it all just manifested in a horrific series of murders, which happened over only few days, which well,
there's so much to unpack with that, because you said he was a musician, wasn't he? He's the rock and roll kind of maniac in that sense, pop culturally, but he learnt to play guitar, I read, by a guy, Alvin Carcass.
Creepy Carcass,
in the I think the 10 years he was in prison.
That's right.
He learnt guitar, so he came out with this talent, and I understand he was a good songwriter as well. Is that correct?
He's a very interesting songwriter. I think his songs are unusual, and they're well constructive. Neil Young said he was a song spewer, in as much as that he just gave him a guitar and he could sort of just come out with all sorts of incredible songs, and they're all the thing that makes it interesting for me is that the lyrics deal with sort of mind and ego and all the sort of philosophies which he'd been dipping in and out of. That makes him unique within that time, although having said that, there was a lot of people certainly exploring inner space as far as music was concerned. So I don't think he fitted in well. I think he was, you know, in that respect, he was he could have, you know, I don't know, Arthur Lee of Love, John Sebastian were doing similar songs.
Sure.
He could have probably got a record contract. He certainly was courted by some record labels, and the likes of Dennis Wilson, I say Neil Young, had recommended him for recording, and so there is a possibility that he may well have had a record out and possibly a recording career, which may well have turned things around. The problem was, and I have this on first hand, is that Manson round a campfire with the guitar, with the girls all falling over him, which was incredible, but you put that in a recording studio and you bounce it down to tape, and it lost a lot in the translation, a lot. And I think that's what really happened, is that
so without that image, I suppose, then it was just down to the raw sound and talent.
Yeah, I mean, it's just on tape, so it was another guy singing. There are some demos around from the those sessions which he did, certainly with the Beach Boys studio and before at Universal Records, which are interesting. I don't think they're fantastic. I don't think they would be any great noise on the circuit. I mean, Manson himself, apparently, allegedly, was eager that his music was going to, you know, act as a great emolument for change. I don't know. I don't know if that would happen, but I mean, they're interesting. I think they were no worse than some of the bands that did get record contracts. Let's say that much.
Well, how does the Dennis Wilson thing? I heard. Did he steal some lyrics or a song from him, and that was the beginning of this kind of like he fell in with the Beach Boys in a sense, or didn't?
Well, Dennis Wilson was a guy who rode high on excess. He was of all the Beach Boys, he was the character who would enjoy the excesses of fame, and he certainly was a serial shagger, into drugs, and so when he collided with the Manson family, I mean, he met two girls who were hitchhiking, and took them back to his house, a very palatial sort of hunting lodge in Beverly Hills, I think. And then he went off to a recording session and then came back and found the whole Manson family in there with Charlie at the head of it. And I think, again, Manson, going back to his prison days and knowing the collateral of young girls, you hike them around anywhere and say to people, hey, you know, you get me, you get these girls, you know, and the girls were happy to oblige. So I think Dennis was really swayed by that, and I think a few people I couldn't even name in the book, took part in many of these sessions at Dennis Wilson's house. Many well-known names were involved with all of that.
You've been embargoed.
Yeah, that's something which I think a lot of people a little bit upset about, that they may be associated with things that went on. Hey, it was Los Angeles 1967, it went on everywhere. So I think that Manson was interested in becoming a musician, and I hate to use the word rock star, but I think he certainly wanted to get his message of his music out there. How desperate, I don't know. Many people told me he wasn't. A lot of people told me he was desperate, so you have to draw probably in the middle of that. I think that Dennis Wilson was certainly a person who could push him in that direction. The Beach Boys had their own record label called Brother Records, and of all the songs, funny enough, of all the songs that Manson previewed to Dennis Wilson, Wilson was enchanted with a song called "Cease to Exist."
Right.
And he took that song, and he changed some of the lyrics. It's pretty indistinguishable from Manson's version, but Manson was hurt by that. Manson was probably hurt even more that the song was credited to Dennis Wilson. But then it's also possible, as we know about the music industry, that Manson was paid off. Said, look, we'll take the song, here's some money. According to Manson, I think he got nothing. I don't know. And maybe that Manson had run up such a debt at the Wilson household that they said that was fair. Fair dues. So I don't again, there was a hostility from that moment onwards.
Sure.
And he felt that Dennis, and also Dennis's close friend, a guy called Terry Melcher, who'd also promised the possibility of a recording contract, had taken several steps back after hearing. Not so much hearing Manson, I think it was seeing the whole scene. I think they were spooked by it. Remember, because if this was an outstanding talent, I don't think they would have been too spooked by sort of the ambience that surrounded Manson. The fact is that he was a mediocre talent. I don't think anyone was prepared to sort of push out with this guy. The fact he pulled a knife on someone in a recording studio and beat up someone at one point possibly also added to the slight nervousness of taking him on. But he was rejected, and that's the reality.
Like he was by his mother and stuff.
Rejected by everyone.
Yeah. So as we, I guess, turn the corner now into when the sweater truly unravels, and we finally hit the Manson murders helter skelter, resulting in the death of, I guess, like a burgeoning Hollywood starlet, Sharon Tate, wife of Roman Polanski, who was pregnant at the time, and the LaBiancas, who was that the next night as well?
Yeah.
If we can unpack how that actually happens, I mean, what was the start of this? Because I think Patricia Kirkenwell said they were doing lots of LSD with Manson, but she was, I think, looking back, convinced he wasn't on the LSD. He was reenacting the crucifixion and creating this messianic, more so than he probably had, not just with his words, but in physical form.
Yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter was, by July 1969, Manson's, from his, and if you listen to some of the early interviews he did and tapes, he seems quite a happy, sort of puckish type of character. But as I say, the collapse of his musical dreams was compounded by they lived on an old movie ranch in the Chatsworth area of Los Angeles,
right?
And that was
that like a false front western town kind of old set? Yeah, it
was an old movie set. That's right. And I think they were living a Huckleberry Finn existence, which was joyous. You know, it was kids running around, playing games, smoking dope, making love. Hippie heaven, you know. But again, you know, these things, the party can only go on for so long, and that's when a lot of people arrive with drugs and drug dealing. And as we know about, you know, the counterculture, that once drug dealers get involved with anything, then it sours, and it sours very quickly. I'd hazard a guess, once drugs get involved with anything, it sours pretty quickly. It can't last forever. And that's when it all started to take a downturn. So the events that led to the murders were...
It's a house in the Hollywood Hills, right? Is there a reason why that was targeted in particular? Or?
There's many reasons for that. Sharon Tate was on her way to becoming a very famous
movie star,
frontline Hollywood movie star. But more important, I think, she was married to Roman Polanski, who was the director of the moment. Rosemary's Baby, Repulsion, Knife in the Water, all that. I mean, he was very hot property. But anyway, what really happened was that once the drunks got involved, one of the members of the family someone had got killed who was apparently a sweet guy, but he got mixed up with the drug industry. Manson wasn't involved with that, but again, he was schooled enough to know that once the investigation started, that the tentacles would all head back to him.
Sure.
Then we had another situation where another member of the Manson family had hoodwinked some drug dealer and he got shot. Manson was involved with that. Manson thought he killed the drug dealer. So we've got two situations which will again... And remember, Manson was possibly... I never really tracked this down, and I should have done. He was possibly still on licence. He was possibly still on extended parole, so he knew full well that he could be straight back in the slammer. So again, that would fall back to him. We had the situation, this is really key, and I pointed that out in the book, which no one else really has done, that he went off to a place called Big Sur, where there was an institute, a New Age institute called Esalen, to take some of his music. He had this feeling that it's possible that the people out there would really royally welcome his music, where everyone else seemed to be sort of shying away, and he made an extended trip over there and was ignored.
Right.
So this was not good. On returning back to Spahns Ranch, he found out, in addition to the drug dealer getting shot, that the other character had died, two members of the family had been arrested for credit card theft use that day, and his music had collapsed. People were also questioning the questioning his sort of. I mean, this is what happens with when you have a community and a community elder with sort of messianic qualities. A lot of people are going to start saying after a while, well, what's happening? You know, where is this revolution? Where is this record career? Where is this apocalypse? Where is this? You know, it's not unreasonable that after a couple of years that the character you thought was a divine avatar, a Christ-like, Satan-like figure, that the world was pretty much the same as it was. And a lot of people were questioning it, and that really, his dominion was being rocked.
Right.
So I want to write, and as I pointed out in my sort of, hour by hour detail, that Manson arrives back at Spahn's ranch at 2 o'clock with his world collapsing in on him, to find then that these 2 girls had done for credit card theft, with all the other stuff, and then he just said, well, now is the time for Helter Skelter. Now Helter Skelter is Manson's catchphrase, which he associated with the Beatles song Helter Skelter from the White Album.
So possible race war, is that correct?
Possible, yeah. I mean, it's an apocalypse. I mean, it's a really interesting. I don't think that much. I think a lot of words were said in the hippie world, and certainly Manson's world. And I think it was just initially just words. Manson would say, preach about, and he had certain. I mean, he brought with him this sort of racism, which was the 1950s, and pre that. And I think in that respect that he to these young kids, and I mean a lot of them sort of were they were really sucked in by what he had to say, and I think that it's just something which I find it difficult to talk about, because ultimately, racism is strange, and it's strange in that environment of the hippie thing, which was supposed to be. But then Manson always claimed that they weren't hippies. He said they were slippies.
Right.
So they weren't. He didn't like the hippies. That their unconditional sort of love. I mean, he used it, but I think he was into other realms in that respect.
Right. So how does he talk people into actually going to this house and murdering?
Well, we'll say it was 2 o'clock on the afternoon of August 8th. He just got back from being rejected by the people at this place called the Estlin Institute.
Right.
And I think that it's it was a measure of his desperation that he just said, right, okay, well, now is the time for Helter Skelter.
Right.
And he wanted, the house was owned by Terry Melcher, who happened to be one of the record producers who bailed on him.
Yeah.
So in a sense, he knew Melcher had gone. He knew Melcher had left that house, and he was possibly aware that Sharon Tate lived there. Although, as far as he's concerned, it was just owned by some movie stars. Do
you think the original intention perhaps was to go and just graffiti the house, or steal something, or get back at Melcher's house in some way?
No. I think murder was on the cards from the word go with that one.
Right.
The layout of Cielo Drive, which is at the end of a private road. For a seasoned conscript like Manson, he knew that the end of the road house is not going to raise too much suspicion. I mean, his main worry was anyone would get caught, and would lead back to him.
Right.
So I think he was clever enough to realise that house, he's not going to go into a residential area with houses on each side. This was very much at the end of the road. So I mean,
sure.
as far as he was concerned, that was a logistically a good place to go. He didn't go. You see, that's also interesting. He sent his people along. The main hatchman for the night was a guy called Tex Watson, who'd ripped off one of the drug dealers, which Manson got implicated in. So in that respect, he owed Charlie big time, and Charlie knew that he owed it big time. So he was able to say, well, you can go off there with this guy. The girls can go with this guy called Tex, and you can. To just do the most horrific things imaginable. So in that respect, it's pretty academic. Why did Manson go? I think Manson was in that heat of the moment, his psychotic moment. He probably didn't want to get caught, and he felt this guy owed him. So it was.
So from door to door, how does this actually play out? What did Manson do? How did they get into the house, and what did they do?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty grisly.
This is just night number one, isn't it?
This is just night number one. It's pretty grisly. I mean, they went off 4 of the girls.
Who are the victims and who are the attackers?
So basically, Tex Watson was the main hatchman for the night. He owed Manson. Susan Atkins, who was one of Manson's sort of front street girls. She was.
She's one of the very most attractive of, I guess, the girls, right?
She's a pretty girl, you know. And he had this thing called front street girls, which he would use as pimping.
Right.
He's very clever in that respect. There was Linda Kasabian, who was apparently on the night used because she's the only one with a valid driver's license. I don't know what I feel about that, but she
designated driver.
Yeah, she claims she was.
Krenwinkel,
Patricia Krenwinkel was a very loyal Mansonite. She was a sort of slightly overweight girl who Manson had picked up and filled her full of nonsense of how beautiful she was, which of course at that age. When validation, absolute validation, christened by LSD, and then you have the whole scenario, this sort of zombie warrior because Charlie said so, you know. And they went off to Cielo Drive, which is in Beverly Hills, a private estate where it was easy enough to leave the car at the bottom of the drive, walk to the end. Tex cut the telephone wires. They went in to find.
Oh wow, so that's pretty dark as well, isn't it, in and of itself?
Yeah, and I would have thought that's an instruction from Charlie. Those telephone wires were a bit out of the way. They've been mains electricity wires, so someone knew a little bit what's going on there. Inside was Jay Sebring, a hairdresser, a famous hairdresser, the inspiration for the film Shampoo, and
like possibly a Vidal Sassoon if he'd obviously carried on, right?
Yes, and he probably was the Vidal Sassoon at the time of LA anyway. And then you had Wojciech Frachowski and his wife. Slightly interesting characters. Abigail Folger, his wife, was the heir to a Folger coffee. So she was very rich. Wojciech was a struggling film person, allied to Roman Polanski. He wasn't sort of in the same league as Polanski, and he had slightly nefarious dealings around town,
right,
which has led to a plethora of conspiracy theories that in fact the Tate murders were actually as a result of a botched drugs deal. So
sure.
That's another story. But anyway, the savagery meted out on that night was absolutely horrific. And remember, Sharon Tate was 8.5 months pregnant, who was slaughtered by these people, notably Tex Watson. A young guy who was visiting someone in the guest house just had the misfortune to be driving out as this lot arrived. So he was killed.
Stephen Parent, right? Was he 19, I think, or something?
Yeah, just a kid. You know.
He wasn't to do with the movies. He was just, I think he picked one of the members up, I think weeks before, and they became friends with him. He gave them a lift home.
He gave a lift home to the guy who was the gatehouse keeper.
Yeah.
So he had nothing to do with
Manson. Dropped by any time, they said, and he just picked the wrong night.
Just the wrong night. Well, she was leaving, so he really picked the wrong night. So, and then, you know, they daubed in blood around the Tate residence, pretty horrific, and very much sort of Manson-esque writings. But interestingly, that Susan Atkins put on the door of the building Pig, hoping that the Black Panthers who
would get the blame.
Yeah. See, I think that was another thing which Manson was keen on, was to defer the blame onto the Black Panthers, who they felt that maybe the police would go straight for that, and you know, it's pretty innocent stuff when you think about it. But
yeah,
that was the MO.
No, well, they were completely butchered, weren't they? Sharon Tate was 8 months pregnant, right? She was stabbed multiple times, and I think she was noosed around the neck and slung over a beam and attached to the hairdresser, wasn't she?
Yeah, I mean, it's all very, very gruesome, and I must say, when I wrote that chapter, that really
Jay Sebring, sorry, yeah,
it destroyed me. It was absolutely horrific, because you have to. I mean, this is the thing when you're a writer, that you have to go, and you know, for a story that's been told before, I had to go even deeper, because I had to find out. And the other thing which I thought was really important was that there's a certain amount of romance, I hate to say that word, attached to the Manson family, but Charlie does come across as a cheeky chappy at times, and I think it has to be said what happened that night, regardless if he was involved. That is the story. That's why we know about Manson. If there was no murder, there's no Manson.
So what brings us to the next night? They clear out. Do they escape unscathed? Does anyone stay behind? Or
there's a little bit which I sort of revealed in the book, which a few people have confirmed.
So it's like ritual killing in a sense,
yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah. That Manson went back after the killings. When they got back to the ranch, he was disappointed, A, that they hadn't extended the killing spree, apparently, allegedly, and B, he was concerned, and he says this in his own biography. Actually, he was concerned that they'd left clues, because from what he'd heard, it sounded like a sloppy killing.
Well, he surely must have. What was the plan in his head then? They escape. They go on and kill more people on the way out. He surely knew he'd get caught. They'd finger him in a sense, or you know.
Well, you think
was he that convinced they'd like keep silent?
He certainly got away with it for a good 6 months. That was the interesting thing about it. I mean, the second night where the supermarket grocer and his wife were killed.
Lino LaBianca, right, and his
LaBianca.
wife.
That was more random. There's not. Again, this has been more the speculation of the killings to the conspiracy. Is that where, you know, it's A to B, Manson gets peed off because he doesn't get a record deal or has resentment towards the record industry, and they go to a former home of the music industry guy and kill everyone. Then from that point of view, you could say, okay, fine, but where does then a supermarket manager and his wife get slaughtered in a totally different area of LA? Where's that all coming from? What's interesting, and a guy called Phil Kaufman, who was another person who championed Manson's music, gave me the answer really to it, that he and another guy were living next door to the LaBiancas, a guy called Harold True, again another associate of Manson's, again someone who had promised things. I mean, Kaufman had promised music deals, etc.
Sure.
And that's the first place that they went to the second night, and it was empty, luckily for those guys. So they went next door. So my own personal feeling is that Manson would, if they'd been in, that would have been the slaughterhouse number 2. But as he told his followers, it was a random killing just to
throw the scent off.
And say we're still going to go through killing someone. They go next door. I don't think there's any more to it than that. Other people who've studied this conspiracy drug angle in greater depth than I have say there is a link. I do not know about that. I'm not. Well, no, I do know about it, but I'm not convinced. I tried to boil this whole thing down. Really, that, as I say, I think Manson's actions were very much instinctive. I don't think planning was something that came into that.
Was the Zodiac operating around this time period as well? Was he a suspect at all?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, some of the killings of the Zodiac with the Manson family, in particular, guy. Well, there's another story, but certainly the hallmarks of the Tate killing were, and also the sort of enigmatic ways that the killings were, you know, reported at and hinted at, also have resonances. Having said that, the manpower and the personnel who were connected to the Manson murders, which ran into hundreds,
right, and
have continued interest, there's no real concrete proof as yet. And I still think that the Manson murders were very sloppy. Not that I'm an authority on murders, but let's go to the second night at the LaBianca's house. Now, Manson had run a nightclub at the Strans ranch.
LaBianca was a supermarket magnate or chairman, wasn't he? Something?
Yeah, gateway.
An executive,
gateways, it was nothing. You know, it was obviously living in relative splendour in Walt Disney's old house of all places. But the second night, when they did their similar thing, the first night of daubing enigmatic slogans in blood.
Well, they carved war onto Lino's chest, didn't they?
Yeah. They went. One of the girls, Patricia Krenwinkel, wrote on the fridge "Helter Skelter." Now, given that the nightclub at Spartan's Ranch, which had drawn hundreds of people, given Manson's prattling about Helter Skelter to all record industry people and anyone connected with the family,
yes,
it was an act, I don't know, I won't say an act of God, but they were so lucky that when it was reported in the paper, the detail of that Helter Skelter daubing wasn't printed. Because so many people knew about Manson's Helter Skelter theories that if it's Helter Skelter had been, and this is why I think the murder stopped. You see, I think Manson, once he found out that she'd written Helter Skelter, he probably went into an apoplectic fit.
Yes. Because
that's the key to everything. And it was only sort of because the police ineptitude that allowed that to go through.
So do you think, had she not written that on the wall, the killings would have gone on and the police wouldn't have known what was going on? Would have been a kind of a Zodiac in a sense? If
the Helter Skelter motif, which had been written in blood on the refrigerator, had been made public, Manson and his crowd would have been behind bars within 24 hours.
Right.
Absolutely convinced of it.
So someone on the inside must have known in the police department. Why wouldn't they have just gone and grabbed them immediately? How did Manson evade capture, or even like not come under anyone's focus for 6 months?
Well, because what happens is that the police were convinced it was a drug hit.
Right.
And
even on the LaBiancas?
No, and
No.
the interesting thing about that is because two police departments were working on it. You had the LAPD working on the Tate murder, and the LASO, which is the sort of wider Los Angeles Sheriff's Office, working on it. It was just, they were completely unrelated. There was two teams working on this,
Right.
who were unrelated. In fact, on the other murder, this guy who was the friendly musician guy called Gary Hinman, who had been murdered by a guy called Bobby Bosley, who was a family associate. Now that some of the girls were involved. The LSAO were convinced that the writings on the wall were similar and felt there was a connection, but the Los Angeles Police Department just ignored it because they were so consumed and so intoxicated with this drug hit. Mind you, J.C. Bring, Wojciech Frykowski and some of the characters who went to Cielo Drive were involved in drugs.
Right.
So it made sense to think, yes, this is definitely a drug hit. But while those investigations went on, Manson, of course, and co. had cleared off to Death Valley. There was one other murder prior to moving off to Death Valley with a stuntman at Spartan's Ranch, a guy called Donald Shorty Shea, who it was well known that he despised the Manson family, but it was also possible that he had an inkling to what had actually gone on, so he was done away with. And then they went off into the desert and living this sort of mad lifestyle at Barker Ranch out in Death Valley.
Wow.
And that's where it was only again through Manson and some of his cohorts destroying an earth-moving vehicle that the police up there started sniffing around, again working independently from the Los Angeles Police Department. It's just, if anything, it's just a catalogue of errors and missed opportunities. Again, I think the celebrity of the case was that there was many people clutching at straws, wanting to solve it.
Mm.
But it took months for it to even get a sniff on it. You know.
It's crazy.
Absolute madness.
So they all get caught. Manson's on trial.
Yeah.
And now, how did he? Is it Krenwinkel? Are they fingered as well and taken in? Are they
Susan
on trial?
Atkins was the one who was taken in up in Death Valley, and she was the loose cannon, and she
Right.
spilled the beans to some of her prison cohorts. Two of them, and again another. You know, they were trying to get hold of the police to tell them what they'd been told.
Right.
And the police sort of ignored this on the first occasion, but it was only after these two other convicts, Virginia Graham and someone called Ronnie Howard, who badgered the police. Eventually, they got Susan Atkins in, and she spilt the beans, and it all fell in from there.
Sure.
Manson, who was in jail up in Death Valley on the charges of the destruction of the Earth Mover, it was all starting to be pieced together. Other people were coming forward as well, and once you've got an avalanche, it just poured in on them.
Who were the women that turned up at the court, that walked to the court on their hands and knees and shaved their head and carved the X into their head, which became a swastika later on, of course, but it started off as an X? Who were they part of the Helter Skelter killings?
No.
Was that Atkins, Krenwinkel, No.
Yeah. The Helter Skelter killings were Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel,
There's
Susan
called
Atkins.
Squeak as well, isn't there?
Squeaky was not. And this is the other thing. See, Manson, again, with the people he chose to go on these killing sprees, and I say chose at very short notice, he's instinctive enough to realise there was some who couldn't handle it.
Right.
So there was quite a few girls who were at the Manson family ranch who weren't chosen to go on the killing sprees and had followed Manson in his wake. Many of the girls, he was very careful about who he shared information with. So I mean, I think but they were still loyal acolytes to Charlie, and they, being banned from the courthouse, took up residence on the street and did everything that they've mirrored Manson. They shaved their heads, they cast swastikas into their foreheads, they maintained a position out there for the entirety of the trial.
Who do you think out of that group, innocent in commas, was anyone is in jail still? Well, they all should still be in jail, but is anyone still in jail that should maybe be paroled or be eligible or has a voice? Or a counterpoint of an argument to go, I shouldn't be here anymore, I was under the influence of this or that, I'm not a psychopath, I'm not a murderer. Okay,
well, it's a celebrity case, so that takes it to another level. I queried the main prosecutors of this when I wrote the book and said, well, there are other people who been involved with murders who've got out after 20 years, and someone like Leslie Van Houten was involved with 2 murders and has spent 43 years in jail, 44 years in jail. But you know, we're undermining then the nature of this, the sense that the case has such a celebrity, their protestations with such a massive audience. I mean, who's going to support that? Because parole boards, and remember they've all got parole, they're all on death row until a case in the early 70s abolished the death sentence in California. A few years later, the death sentence was reinstated, but when that ruling was made, it couldn't be made retroactive. So everyone, including Manson, on death row, had their sentences immediately commuted to life imprisonment with the chances of parole. So for every 7 years or whatever, they get parole. But parole hearings, parole officers are politically appointed, and ultimately the parole has to be signed off by the governor of California. So what's in it for him? What's in it for him is if he releases a member of the Manson family.
Bad press.
Bad press. If he doesn't release a member of the Manson family, who cares? Their voices of support are minor compared to the voices that would say they got away They got away with it because they didn't have the death penalty.
Are any of them, including Charlie, classed as insane or psychopathic? I mean, is there a designation they've been given to them psychologically too?
No, Tex Watson tried for that in his original trial, and Tex Watson was the man who carried out most of the physical murders, the actual murders themselves.
He fathered several children in prison, didn't he?
Yes, they had conjugal rights until Sharon Tate's mother actually.
That's ridiculous. That's crazy.
Well, I mean, it goes up and down. So you get the liberal, and then you get the other side.
Yeah,
It just bounces back and forwards. I feel sorry for the kids.
Yeah, I know.
And the fact that someone like that who took away life, could.
Does Charlie get that privilege in prison? Conjugal visits, or has he?
No, there's no conjugal visits, but he gets visits, and this young girl Star, who mimics in looks and voice one of the young Manson girls, especially Susan Atkins. It's incredible. That
if you Google her, listeners, I'll put some up on the video as well. She doesn't look like she's all there anyway, does she? She's got a kind of starey look.
Yeah, she's perfect Manson family material. I mean, I think she's intoxicated with the myth, and I dare say if she is going to marry him, she's marrying Manson the myth rather than Charles Manson, the 80-something prison convict. I think Manson's clever enough to realise that it will cause the authorities a lot of embarrassment if he marries her. It's no skin off his nose if he marries her. Might even get, some extra time out of what he's currently doing to marry her. But she runs websites, and she's his voice of his atoire, his air, trees, water and animals environmental campaign, which he is keen to promote from behind bars. Although, if anyone has been to Death Valley and see the destruction and horror that the massive cars and other detritus which they left behind, I don't buy it. Having said that, it's all part of the myth. And,
none of them are getting out, are they? Krenwinkel, Atkins.
No, Atkins died. Atkins died a couple of years ago, and it was interesting.
Oh, yes, she had cancer, didn't she?
She did.
Yes,
she
had brain cancer.
Yeah, and she had leg amputated, and she was wheeled into a parole hearing on a gurney, and it was the most unbelievable thing I think I've ever seen. And even in that situation, she was denied parole.
Yeah.
So if that is denied parole, I don't think any of them. Bruce Davis is the most interesting one, because Bruce Davis was not involved with the Tate killings. He was certainly involved in other killings, and he's been given parole by parole boards on quite a few occasions, but it's always been bounced back by the governor. So even if an ambient member of the Manson family can't get parole these days, then none of the frontline people are. No, never. And what's the point? There's no point. I mean, we're still in what they'd be in their 70s now, 60s and 70s now. Maybe in their 90s, I don't know. Maybe when they're so old that they can't move, they'll be moved to a prison care home. I don't know. But they certainly won't see daylight, as we know.
No. The book, ladies and gentlemen, is Charles Manson, Coming Down Fast. It's available on Amazon. Where else can they get it?
All good bookshops. I think... I mean, if there are any bookshops left,
or an outlet they can buy it directly from you, or not?
You can find me on cyberspace, and if you do contact me directly, I'm more than happy to sign anything and answer any questions.
Excellent.
More than happy.
Well, we're just about to run out of time. Thank you for watching and listening, folks. It's Ethan McKinley's Questionable. If you want to support the show, you can donate $1 up here in the top left corner, and you can follow and of course subscribe below. Hit the red button, And yeah, we'll be back with more episodes. More of Simon. We've got his book on Quadrophenia coming up, and one on the Rolling Stones. I've been Ethan McKinley. This is Questionable, and that's what you've been watching, kids. See you soon. Bye.
I never broke nobody's will. I never told anybody to do anything other than what they wanted to do. Wait a minute. I said, you do what's best for you. You do what you feel is right. You do what you think is right. Now, whatever you think is right, it's got to be right. All I'm doing is I'm walking with you. I'm walking in line with you, and I'm holding the line with you. What you do is up to you. It's got nothing to do with me. I see blood in here every day. Every day someone's getting shot, someone's getting cut, someone's getting beat. I've lived in that all my life, woman. That don't wrinkle up my forehead. You can pile 100 dead bodies up in front of my cell, and it don't set me to do nothing.
It's in, side, it's in the back, the front, no it's in the back, no it's in the front, no it's in the back, they shoved it in the back, they put it in the back, all the love in the back, get in the back, all the love, get in the back, boy. And they call it your subconscious. Remember Freud? And the front is your computer. And I call him old ego is a too much thing. Old ego is a too much thing. He'll make you fool yourself. You'll think you're somebody else. Look out now. Oh, the trouble you bring. It makes you want to jump on a band fight, and you can't stand not to be right. It'll make you lie, make you cheat, just so you won't be beat. It'll make you get on out of sight. You get afraid you're gonna act like a clown. And do you get mad when somebody puts you down? Your heart's a pumping and your paranoid's just jumping. Look out, ego is a too much thing. When everything seems going so fine, old ego puts itself on in a bind. Your certainty turns to doubt, and then you start flipping out. Then you ease on out of your mind.